Welcome, dear traveler. Tonight, I'll guide you back through history to a place of quiet ambition and of dreams cast in steel. We'll journey not to the tragedy that history often recalls, but to the beginning, to the building of a ship so grand she seemed almost imagined. You'll hear the sounds of hammers echoing across shipyards, the low hum of engines not yet awakened, the whisper of steam and sawdust, and the heartbeat of human hands working with care. As the story unfolds, let each word drift over you like the tide. There's no need to stay awake. You can simply rest and float through time, through memory, through quiet creation. So settle in, dear traveler. Let the waters of sleep carry you now. Our journey begins. This is the Titanic. In the early years of the 20th century, on the eastern shore of the River Lagan in Belfast, Ireland, the sounds of hammers, steam whistles, and shouting men filled the air. It was here, at the Harland and Wolff shipyard, that an idea born from ambition and competition began its journey toward steel and shape. The White Star Line, seeking to compete with the speed and success of the Cunard Line, envisioned something different. Not just speed, but scale. Not just engineering prowess, but elegance. The plan was not to build the fastest ships across the Atlantic, but the largest, the most luxurious, and the safest. That vision materialized in two ships, Olympic and Titanic. Titanic would be the crowning jewel, a floating palace, an icon of human progress. And her story, long remembered for its tragic end, began in an environment full of hope, innovation, and pride. The construction of Titanic began with the laying of the keel on March 31st, 1909. Her hull was designated as number 401. She would be the largest man-made moving object on Earth at the time, and rising more than 100 feet high. The size was unprecedented, and the scale of work required an enormous labor force. More than 3,000 workers would participate in her construction. Many of them were local men, riveters, carpenters, electricians, engineers, who arrived daily in heavy boots and cloth caps, carrying with them the tools of their trade and a quiet, sturdy work ethic passed from one generation to the next. The keel was the backbone, laid down on wooden blocks and forming the central spine of the vessel. It marked the first moment that the Titanic moved from paper into reality. Slowly, methodically, the steel ribs rose from the keel like the skeleton of some enormous leviathan. Heavy steel plates were hauled into place by giant gantry cranes, suspended high above the dock, and riveted together with red-hot iron. The noise was relentless. Teams of riveters heated, passed, hammered, and sealed each rivet by hand. Each day brought thousands of them. The sound echoed across the river, a constant rhythm of clanging metal and shouted instructions, a language of industry. As the months progressed, the outline of the ship began to emerge from the scaffolding. Bulkheads were formed, decks were laid, and hull plating crept up foot by foot. The outer skin of the Titanic was composed of over 3 million rivets and thousands of steel plates, each measured and cut to fit the exact contours of her curves. Her double bottom added strength, and her 15 watertight bulkheads, designed to limit flooding, were a marvel of early 20th century naval engineering. In theory, the ship could remain afloat with up to 4 compartments flooded. That confidence later would prove misplaced. Titanic's construction demanded new solutions. Her sheer size required that Harland and Wolff build a new dry dock, one of the largest in the world. A massive gantry was built to surround her construction site. It stood 228 feet tall and spanned over 800 feet in length, dwarfing the men and machines beneath it. From this steel framework, cranes and derricks extended, lifting beams and components into place with calculated precision. Workers swarmed like ants across the structure, welding, riveting, aligning, and inspecting. Despite the danger, accidents were rare, though lives were lost. At least 8 workers died during Titanic's construction, and many more were injured. In those days, workplace safety was a distant concept, and the job carried inherent risks. Below the decks, systems were being installed that would eventually power this behemoth across the Atlantic. Titanic was equipped with 29 boilers, each housed in 6 boiler rooms. These would provide the steam needed to drive 2 reciprocating steam engines and a central low-pressure turbine. Combined, they would produce over 46,000 horsepower. Her triple-screw design meant that power was delivered through 3 propellers, the central one smaller and turbine-driven, while the port and starboard propellers were attached to the main engines. Each component of this machinery was custom-built, assembled in stages, and tested in the dock before installation. Inside the hull, the decks were fitted one by one, starting with the orlop decks deep in the ship, where cargo, mail, and machinery would be stored, and progressing upward through the lower, middle, and upper decks. Each level brought new purpose and new detail. Plumbing, electrical wiring, and ventilation were routed through walls and ceilings. Cabins and public spaces took shape as steel partitions were installed and finished with wood, paint, and fixtures. The interiors, especially on the upper decks, reflected the ambition not only to transport passengers, but to indulge them. Titanic's first-class accommodations were inspired by the grand hotels of London and Paris. No expense was spared. Mahogany paneling, oak wainscoting, and elaborate plaster ceilings adorned the corridors. The grand staircase, lit by a glass dome and an ornate bronze cherub, spiraled elegantly between decks. Lounges were decorated in Louis XV and Georgian styles, with deep armchairs, crystal chandeliers, and writing desks placed beside tall windows. The first-class dining stretched nearly 100 feet in length and could seat over 500 guests. It was fitted with gleaming white columns and ceiling beams, with meticulously laid carpet underfoot. In contrast, second-class passengers were afforded their own spaces of dignity and comfort. A library, a smoking room, and an open dining area that rivaled the first-class quarters of other liners. And below, even third-class accommodations, often neglected on other vessels, were clean, bright, and comparatively spacious. Cabins were organized in family groups, meals were served in shared dining rooms, and passengers had access to bathrooms, a rare luxury for steerage travelers of the day. The fittings and furnishings of Titanic were gathered from across the British Isles and beyond. Carpets were delivered from Axminster. China and silverware bore the insignia of the White Star Line. Linens arrived from Belfast and Dundee. Grand pianos, marble-topped tables, and upholstered divans were carefully hoisted aboard, covered and secured. Every detail, from doorknobs to wall sconces, was reviewed by the Harland and Wolff design department. The ship was not only an engineering feat but a work of art. As the internal construction neared completion, her exterior was painted. Below the waterline, anti-fouling red, with a white superstructure and 4 large funnels painted in buff yellow with black tops. The 4th funnel, a dummy, served primarily for symmetry and to ventilate the galleys below. Titanic's sleek lines and towering presence made her a commanding sight. As she loomed over the docks in early 1912, her completion was nearly at hand. Sea trials began on April 2nd, 1912. Under her own steam, Titanic left the dock and entered Belfast Lough, accompanied by harbour tugs and White Star Line officials. On board, engineers and representatives from Harland and Wolff tested her handling, speed, turning radius, and safety systems. She reached speeds over 21 knots, performed emergency stop maneuvers, and demonstrated her turning circle. Compass systems were calibrated. Steering gears were tested. Safety mechanisms, including watertight doors and lifeboat davits, were examined. After a full day of sea trials, she was declared seaworthy and set course for Southampton, her port of departure. At the docks in Southampton, Titanic took on final supplies. Tons of coal, crates of food, bottles of wine, stacks of linens, and thousands of pieces of crockery and cutlery. The ship was provisioned to host more than 2,000 souls across the Atlantic, with excess in case of delays. Her crew began to assemble, many boarding for the first time, receiving assignments and inspecting their stations. Officers tested the wireless system, located in a room adjacent to the bridge, equipped with Marconi instruments capable of sending messages hundreds of miles. Lifeboats were swung out, examined, and repositioned. There were only 14 wooden lifeboats and 4 collapsibles, enough to accommodate just over half the ship's total capacity. At the time, regulations required lifeboats for about 1,000 people, based on ship tonnage, not the number of passengers. Titanic met that standard, though few questioned whether the standard itself was sufficient. By the morning of April 10th, 1912, Titanic was ready. Steam curled from her funnels. Gangways were lowered. Passengers arrived in carriages and on foot. Luggage was hoisted aboard. The buzz of activity filled the air. White Star Line officers stood by as families boarded, some dressed in furs and hats, others in simple travel clothes, all of them unaware that they were stepping into legend. The ship cast off just after noon, gliding into the Solent under the watchful eyes of crowds on shore. Her departure was not without incident. Her passage caused nearby ships to break moorings due to the suction of her massive displacement. But she continued forward, elegant and immense, heading to Cherbourg, then Queenstown, and then across the Atlantic toward New York. Her voyage and its end is a story often told, but the story of her building, of her creation, her crafting, is equally remarkable. Titanic was a triumph of engineering, art, and human labor. In her steel bones were held the hopes of an age, the pride of a city, and the promise of a world ever more connected. Though her life was brief, her making remains a testament to what human hands, working in unity, can achieve. Long before she sailed, long before her name became etched in sorrow, she stood, tall and powerful, in a Belfast shipyard, surrounded by cranes, steam, and the unceasing sound of hammer on steel. In those moments, she was not a tragedy. She was a triumph. And in the quiet memory of that labor, in the stillness of the empty dock today, you can still imagine the shape of her hull, the echo of footsteps on wood, and the whisper of a dream being built, one rivet at a time. And now, dear traveler, the story fades. The ship is built. The hammers are silent. The scaffolding has been taken down, and the workers have returned to their homes. The air is still. The great ship sleeps, just as you are about to. All that remains is calm. A dock touched by morning fog. Gentle waves lapping against the stone. A memory of what once rose from dreams to steel, from vision to vessel. Let your mind drift there now, to the quiet harbour, to the lingering warmth of human effort, to the deep and peaceful sea. You have travelled far tonight, not just through time, but into a space of stillness within yourself. Sleep well, dear traveller.